So this is one means which Silvio Gesell thought, this charge on liquidity, this charge on the money which is drawn out of real economy. I indicated some other points where fundamental changes are necessary. Central banks, as the creators of money, should not be in private hands, because this may lead to big conflicts, to social interests. Their interest is different from the interest of the most part of world population. Meanwhile, there exist proposals in Germany, but also it spreads to other countries, where I myself engage too. And if we say the central or the creation of money belongs into public hand, we do not mean that it should be in the hand of the government, because there is some kind of danger. The government of some countries from time to time in history, they abused this privilege and this possibility and printed money much more than it was indicated. And then it went to inflation, hyperinflation. So it should be an institution separated from, independent from government. But in the German state system, and also in many other democratic countries, we already have different columns of the state system. This is the government. We call it in German the Exekutive. They execute what the execution. Then there is the institution of parliament, the legislative, and then we have the judicative, the
judiciary.
Judiciary, the law system. These should be independent from each other, and we say now there should be a fourth column of state system, state building, the monetative. This is a word which came into my mind some years ago, and it's spreading now as an idea. Monetative, meanwhile in internet, www.monetative.de or Switzerland, CA, and Austria, and maybe even England. I do not know the actual situation at every time. This would be very important, because a monetative could create money also out of nothing, but would have the possibility and the opportunity to give a part of this new created money directly to the government without interest, and eventually even without redemption. So the money would flow into the circulation of economy by state expenditures. The state, if the state demands or pays this or that, then by this way the money would flow into the circulation. And this should be well limited. It should be not too much. In a growing economy, the money should, in its quantity, grow according to the growth of national product, but not more. Okay, then this money would come to the state and into the circulation without interest, without this basic interest, which in the system now is from the beginning on. is an interest burden. This could set the state and not the government into the possibility to redeem former public loans and bonds with the money which is from now not anymore connected and burdened with interest. So there is a chance that the state budget would come out of the growing public debt, which inside the existing monetary system is impossible. It's impossible. But with this model, with this change, it would be possible. This proposal includes also that the creation of money does not belong into the hands of commercial banks. This has to be finished. And okay, all the more the monetative has to create more money to compensate what the commercial banks will have to reduce. And this would not need a revolutionary act which often leads into violence, but there are proposals. I mentioned one name, it is Professor Joseph Huber. And he has made a proposal and developed a proposal of a step-by-step change from the existing monetary system into this system which he sometimes calls Vollgeld, full money, or in this context here, monetative. So these are now three important points, social acupuncture points, where the change is necessary, is needed. And without this change, the crisis will escalate again and again. And what is done up to now is mostly to treat the symptoms, but not to treat the deeper roots. And I will add another proposal which comes from out of another context, where there is emphasized that the banks originally, historically, they had a clear separation between credit and between investment banks. And investment banks go very much into the speculative financial markets. This separation of both was installed in the United States as a result, as a consequence of the big crisis in the 30s of last century, under Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. And this separation of banks as credit institutions and banks as investment banks and speculative institutions, this clear separation was stopped and was put away under Bill Clinton 1999. So both came together again without any wall between, without any clear separation. So credit banks and speculative investment banks, they emerged and were not be separated anymore. So those bank clients who gave to the banks their money and thought that they would give it in credits for serious projects, they did not know that this money which they put in the banks was taken by the banks for financing speculative transactions. And then the big surprise came. What did the banks do with my money? And as you all know, in the last few years, so many losses have taken place in for those who invested their money, trusted to the banks, not knowing that the banks went into the global casino with this money. So there's an additional proposal to come back to this separation, a clear separation. And all this money, which is flown into the speculative system, all those, what they now want to, all those claims which are derived out of these speculative transactions, they have lost. This is what happens in a casino. If one puts the money on to this or that, one has the hope, maybe I will win. But one is conscious, if this doesn't happen with winning, then the money got lost. This is the consequence. Even if one plays lotto, nobody would have the idea, whoa, I didn't win, so now I go to the state and say, please pay me my loss, my fee for the lotto playing, for the lotto game. No, speculation on the international financial markets has its own risks, and if they don't win, they lose. They cannot say, now the state has to pay the difference, our losses. The state has to save us. Nothing. Bankrupt. Lost. This is a clear position. And on the contrary, the credit banks, which have an important function for financing real investment and real production, they have to be protected. And also the debitors, for example, the house owners in the United States who had come into the difficulties, they have to be protected, not to be without a roof above their head. This part of economy, which is linked with real economy, should be protected. The speculative and blown up part, they have to carry the consequences of their risky speculations themselves. And there's one word with some kind of a wall again, and this law under Roosevelt had the name Glass-Steagall Act. And in the discussion is coming back to Glass-Steagall or some kind of this clear separation, a clear wall between real economy and speculative financial markets. So these are in total now 4 important points, social acupuncture points, where the discussion and the change should be focused on. And if this is avoided, then the problems will not be really solved. And the problems will escalate. But sometimes, obviously, it needs an escalation of crisis to let's create fundamental, different and new, or sometimes also old and forgotten insights to flow into society and bring fundamental change to a better world. Okay. So far for this lecture.
Thank you so much.
What do you think? Some time more for some questions, or
Well,
a break at first?
I think there's very many questions.
No, I think,
And after or should we have a break, or do you have to decide how long?
Like it's 12 o'clock now, and But like, if you take 20 more minutes for questions, or like anyone who like now really needs to go to the toilet.
Yeah,
just
can
take
maybe
it.
a 2 minutes break and then have a question session.
10 minutes break.
Like
Well,
just 2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes.
2
so people
minutes.
can
Short
go in the
break.
toilet,
Okay.
and then we can make some more clarifications, I think.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And
Okay.
Does that sound good?
I have so many questions. I always think I was going to go.
My question is two-part. First of all,
Yeah.
A, you suggested that institution right in the middle, monitor, what do you call it?
Monetative.
Monetative.
Monetative. It is a new word. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's a new creation, not creation of money. But
It's a kind of
creation
acupuncture, you said, and it would inject money at this stage, and it would be interest-free. Where is this institution getting money from? Part one. Second part is, we are introducing solution in the middle of the system, and it's kind of acupuncture. So we'll do again and again, and there will be a big hole in the system. You're punching. You are sort of puncturing the body. So I think so. There lies a fundamental sort of flaw in the system that is based on interest. So why not to avoid interest right in the beginning?
Last sentence I didn't catch.
Right in the beginning, interest free.
In the beginning.
Why should we skip interest in general?
I mean, if there is no interest right from the beginning.
From the beginning.
Yeah. Because the system is based on interest from the beginning till the end. So we are introducing solution in the middle of that there should be an institution which will inject money, which will be interest free. So why not to have a system which starts with interest free?
Yeah, this would be a system which would start interest free in relation to the creation of money. The interest is coming into the system and into relevance at several parts of the whole system. You know, one is here. Now, over centuries, it seemed to be quite natural or quasi-natural that the money which is brought into the circulation by central banks is brought into it by way of credit. By way of credit. So the central banks now give credit, for example, to the commercial banks. The commercial banks, they want to earn, they put an amount additionally on the basic interest. They lend it to the companies or to the state or to the households. But from beginning on, from birth on or from creation on, it is combined with interest. And this must not be. If one sees clear to where it leads, to an escalation of problems and a breakdown of state functions and chaos in society, then one has to think about possibilities of a fundamental change. And this is at the beginning, at the moment of creation of money. This does not yet take the money out of this context. Because even with the money which comes into circulation without interest, there will be some parts who have surplus money, more than they consume, and they can say, we give it only as a credit to the banks or to whomever, if there is paid interest. So this is an additional aspect of interest system. And here is the idea of Zielgesell, the privilege of those who have more money than they need to additionally take interest from those who need the money, more or less urgent. This is should be changed. And those who hold the money back or who withdraw the money out of this circulation, they should do it, but not without a charge. And if they are charged for this, many of the speculative and hoarding aspects of money will become uninteresting, so that this circulation is re-established here. So these are two aspects where the interest comes into relevance, at the creation of money and then in the circulation or not circulation of money. Is it clear enough? Then you had another question, the first question, where does the monetative, if it would be installed, take the money from? Where does the central bank take the money from? Where do
that is the basic flaw. Central bank prints notes, prints bills.
Yes.
So if this institution is going to do the same thing, inflation would be there.
No, it depends from the amount, from the relation between the money which has come into circulation and the development of social product. And this should develop parallel. If there would be an overflow of printed money, or in printed form or in other forms, then the danger of inflation is. But if it's less, as it was in the 30s, the central bank, the Fed, reduced the money supplies in the early 30s so dramatically that it was too less. And then we had this, we had a deficiency of demand, and therefore growing unemployment. Both were means totally wrong. In Germany we had also both periods. We had the hyperinflation in 1923, and 6 years later we came into the depression with the mass unemployment. So this shows that it's a very small path, like in the mountains where you climb, yeah, the Grat, how is it called? You have to keep this small path, not to fall down in this valley and not to fall down in the other valley. So this is a small path between inflation and deflation. But this can be only regulated and influenced in a system where the money really flows continuously. How should you regulate a heating system where the water does not flow, the hot water does not flow continuously? You can turn this button there and it doesn't help. So it has to be established, a continuous flow, and then institution, not on private basis, with public responsibility, social responsibility, to regulate the money creation and money circulation in such a way that neither inflation nor deflation develops. This is then the art of monetary policy, which is in the existing system impossible.
But even some
there are other members of the group. I think we should, yes, because we could discuss infinitely.
Yeah.
But your question, where does the monetative take the money from? Out of nothing too. Yeah? Out of nothing too, but she should be responsible and also transparent and under control of public and democratic institutions. Responsible to create the money and to regulate the money circulation in such a way that the money can really fulfill its task to keep stable, not to break down. Okay.
When you talk about the monetative, I'm wondering how do you suggest that the monetative regulates the money that they give out? Because for me, when you talked about housing mortgage, like when people take loans for housing, and you talked about interest and then the balance and then the security.
Yeah.
So in that, you said that the banks, it's not the bank's fault that the people default on their payment or they have to take over the property in order to pay back whatever.
Yeah, it is immanent in the
Yeah,
system,
exactly.
how it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also believe that in the US, because these banks had their own personal self-interest to make profit, they started subprime mortgages in which they gave loans to people with very high risk sections who could not, they knew that they would probably not be able to afford to pay back their loans and their interest, but they gave it to them at a lower rate, which is probably one of the root causes of the financial housing crisis. So, and you suggested, which I thought was a great idea, to separate the speculatory branch of banks and the credit branch of banks.
Yes.
But my question is that the speculatory branch and the credit giving branch, in the end, the money still flows into the same society. So how do you think that is going to change the problem? Because in the end, the speculatory money is still going to be taken out of the same society. So how does this help by dividing it?
Yeah, one of these ideas was to avoid that so much money goes into the speculative sphere. If it goes, then they should carry the risk themselves and not coming
so
back to the...
So the people who speculate should carry the risk?
Yeah.
Okay.
High chance, high risk.
Okay.
This is a rule in market economy. And why shouldn't it be relevant in the financial markets with these immense consequences for global society? Yeah.
So my question was, you talk about the surplus that goes out of the system. Exactly that. And you talk about the charge that should be to that surplus.
Yes.
But my question is, even though we don't have a charge for the surplus that goes out of the system, don't we right now have a system that charges people with surplus indirectly? You're not directly charging the people who are going to take that amount of money out of the system, but you're charging people in our society that have more money, and so those are the people that tend to have more surplus and therefore tend to have the possibility to start speculating. So aren't we putting the charge already indirectly? And if we are, if I'm not missing something, which I probably am, in that way, aren't we already, if there is a problem, is that because some people are playing outside the system's rule? Or is there something that I'm missing? Don't we already charge
Such kind of charge as is proposed here is not yet existing. And another tendency of charge is the inflation. Because if the money gets less and less value, then this is also an impulse to not to hold this money too long, and to better consume it or to use it for other purposes, but not to hold it too long. So some people say, okay, we have already some means of inducing the circulation, but there's a big difference between inflation and this charge which is mentioned here. The charge only works on this money which is drawn out of the real economy, whereas the inflation is has its effects on every monetary quantity, and so that it's not identical. You're not convinced. Yeah.
Well, no, I wasn't talking about. I was talking about high taxes to the highest class. Our society taxes more people who have more money.
You really believe? You
well,
really believe?
It should.
You really should. Yeah, it should. The contrary is the case, as I shortly mentioned. Yeah? The rich one, they have so many possibilities. Offshore finance.
Well, that's what I meant.
Places.
So we already had that charge, but people are able to sneak out of the system.
Yeah, we have a formal charge, tax rates, but the real tax pay is far far more different.
So another third part of
This
the
is
solution,
another issue. Yeah.
so another part of the solution is enforcing
Yeah.
it.
Closing these financial offshore places, which is some of the black holes in international financial system, they have really to be reduced. They must not be closed from one day to another, but to be reduced. Yeah, and yeah. Wait a minute,
I've lived and studied in Canada, and throughout the economic recession, we noticed that our banks were some of the most stable in the world during the recession. And that was due in large part because the system that you're proposing is in fact in place in Canada. The
this separation between credit and investment banks.
Yes, similar to, but in terms of the two faucets that you did create, where commercial banks don't get to print mass amounts of money within Canada. It is owned by the government. Like, government has control of that.
I think this is not right. The government may control, and I'm not sure about the monetary system of the central bank in Canada. But besides, the commercial banks are also able to create money in this, in putting it on the account of debitors, only by computer. This is not possible unlimited, because they have to keep in mind that some percentage of the debitors may come and wants to have cash, yeah? And so for this reason they have to keep reserves, cash reserves, and they are not able to create unlimited account money. But it is in some countries the 10 times more than central bank money, in others 20 times more than central bank money. And as far as I know, also in Canada, it's a big percentage of this account money in relation to the central bank money. Even if the central bank is in a different state and construction compared with the Fed, for example.
But in terms of that, the regulations on that rate, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that less should be just greater regulations. Is that what you're, like, government regulations on the amount that can be?
Yeah, no, it should not be the government to regulate. It should be an independent, in relation to the government, also independent institution. But also, most important, independent from private banking system and from private rich parts of society, from this small financial oligarchy. They should not have the control over the monetary system and over the creation and regulation of money. I suppose it is difficult to imagine that such kind of model or of change could work. I would like to mention one small example. It was not on a national level, but on a regional level in the 30s in Austria. And it was the small town of Wörgl in Austria in the year of 1932. And they brought the money into circulation with this background of a growing economic crisis everywhere around. And this money was like the following example. It carried 12 fields on one banknote, and each field was for 1 month. So if this 100, I show it with this example of 100. If this 100 of this money was thrown out of circulation and hoarded or elsewhere used, if it was brought back, then it has to be covered with some kind of stamp. And as we know it from the letters, a stamp costs more or less. And for each month which passed, there was stamp, another stamp, another stamp. So who hold the money back for half a year had to pay, in this example it were 6%, so the number of 6. The longer you hold the money back or put it into other circulations, then the more expensive it became. And this simple rule was to be understood by the peasants, by the members of this town. And the amazing thing is that as a consequence of this alternative regional money, the circulation of money was re-established. The regional circulation was parallel to the official Austrian shilling, the official currency. And the regional circulation developed, and the mass unemployment reduced, whereas in the surrounding it became more and more worse. And at that time there was a big interest of many other communities in Austria and also then in other countries, but also in Austria, to establish a similar system in their region. And then the Austrian Central Bank went to court and said, I have the privilege to create money. And this was the background that this alternative and very successful model of Vogel was stopped, and all the other regions and communities were forbidden to install a similar model. Interesting is too that in the United States at the same time there was an amazing big movement of, they called it stamp scrip movement. Stamp scrip, it reminds on stamps here. Stamp scrip movement with regional alternative money, and even on the level of states inside the United States. For example, Oregon was short before installing Oregon statewide alternative monetary system. In this case, President Roosevelt, with a consulting background of his experts, I suppose, out of the financial branch, he stopped this kind of alternatives and instead focused on what is called New Deal. So the big state of the United States and the public budget brought these big programs of additional demand, which had its effect, but it was at that time the alternatives were stopped. And after that time, even the memory about what has already been in history, for example in these 30 years, was distinguished. In no economic textbook, in no history book it was mentioned. And only a few years ago, for example, Bernard Lietard, who was an expert in the Belgium Central Bank on the highest level, and later in a private hedge fund in the financial world. He came more and more into doubt. What is the structure and dynamics of this national and international monetary system? And then he left and quit this financial world only to concentrate on research and also historical research. And he gathered a lot of information about alternative monetary systems through history, even centuries back. in Middle Europe there were 3 centuries of amazing economic and cultural flourishing, the so-called flourishing Middle Age in Middle Europe, where the cathedrals developed, where the Middle Age towns developed. Quite amazing. And during this time there existed widespread and also more or less regional monetary systems where the interest didn't play this important role, because it was a money, it was not worth to hold this money back. This would need some additional explanation, but this money circulated continuously, and during these centuries it didn't happen what happens unavoidably in the interest system, which I showed at the beginning, with these devaluation processes. And then they start from new. Everywhere where the interest system is installed, it is accompanied, and not only accompanied, but it leads to fundamental crisis in the time of several decades, let's say half a century. But during this Middle Age, this flourishing Middle Age in Middle Europe, it was not the case. It was an amazing flourishing period over 300 years, with a cultural development and development in many other aspects, where we only can be amazed. And Lyotard and some others, and also Gesell came on this track already decades ago. They interpreted as a consequence of a non-interest system, non-interest monetary system, or where the interest does not play this dominant and important role. So there are alternatives, regional, in the 20th century, in history, elsewhere too. And one can learn from this experience. But this needs a study. And this was a long time not possible. It was forgotten. It was, I didn't hear anything in my study. And decades after this, the same. So you have the opportunity, you come earlier onto this track. Yeah? Use it, the opportunity, the possibility to go into this issue, and you will be amazed. Wow, how different aspects open to the mind, also in having a view on history. History is quite important, influenced by such developments. If the monetary system crashes and breaks down, the society is in danger also to break down in violence. How many experiences of this kind do we need anymore? I think this is enough now. Let's focus on constructive ways for the future. And you are in the situation that you have a lot of time, and you come early onto these tracks. I wished I would have come earlier, much earlier, than it really was the case. But take the chance.
Maybe we can clarify that in the break later.
Okay.
So that you can all get lunch. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, let us thank Vincent for joining us today. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was an honor to have you with us.
Thank you very much too. And thank you for your concentration. I know it's a lot of stuff, and sometimes also a lot of hard stuff. But if one doesn't look into the deeper roots, then the opening of hopeful perspectives is blocked. This is my experience. And if one gets the main important points, then there's a chance to overcome the problems. Yeah, in a social healing process. Okay.